In a world of podcasts, one rises in the night to destroy them all. The elder god in an ocean of noise, the Cthulhu of the airwaves. This is Spoiler Country.
Hello, sorry.
Okay.
All technical difficulties, listeners, are going to be dedicated to my cats that cannot leave me alone.
So welcome back to Spoiler Country, y'all. I'm Renee, and I'm here with Dave Dwonch. And Dave has been a comic writer and artist producing indie titles for over a decade. And in 2010, he founded Action Lab Entertainment and has been the creative director for Action Lab and produced several of their titles, including the Eisner-nominated series Princeless. He's also penned several titles, most notably Vamplets, Cyrus Perkins and the Haunted Taxicab, Double Jumpers, and the hit series Infinite Seven. Some upcoming projects include Prom of the Dead and Burnouts for Image Comics.
Yeah.
Dave, I think I maybe didn't capture everything, but welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good. Clearly that list of things makes it sound like I don't sleep at all, but I can tell you now I am the laziest prolific person on the planet.
I love, we get so many people on this show that are like, wow, that sounds like I'm really impressive. And I'm like, but you are impressed. Like, you've done a lot of work, right? Like, it's not like you've just been sitting twiddling your thumbs for the last however long, right?
Yeah, well, I started out just as an artist, just, like filling notebooks, doodling in high school. And then as soon as I started trying to break into comics, I realized that I was just way into the art of storytelling. And that art is a big part of that in comics, but like for me it was just more about writing. So when I pivoted to writing, like I started that Action Lab with a bunch of like-minded people, and then when we stopped being like-minded, we all kind of I left pretty early on. Well, I want to say early on, but I was there for like 10 years, so it wasn't that early on. But and then I went freelance, and as soon as I went freelance, that's when the career really kind of started. Like I feel like when you have a startup company like that, so much of your time is dedicated to trying to make sure that others have food on the table, that you forget your own stuff. So yeah, well, like when I turned 40, I was like, I'm just gonna pivot. I think I'm gonna start doing stuff for me,
Nice.
Yeah.
And where are you located right now?
Denver, Colorado. So like we moved out here a year ago just in time for some snow, and it's snowing now. And it's why I look like, for the video podcast, I look like, I said I look like a Doctor Who hobo.
Yeah.
Really weird. Too much plaid is what I'm wearing right now.
It feels very appropriate for Colorado.
Yeah, I'm overdoing it. I'm overcompensating for not being a local. I just have to put plaid on. Yeah, lots of it. But yeah, so we moved from the Bay Area in California to Los Angeles for a year and a half. My wife got a job at Amazon Studios, so I thought, I'll just fill up my heart with hopes and dreams of writing screenplays and all that good stuff, and followed her down there. And then COVID shut it down. And so she was able to work from home. And we were like, why are we spending all this money to sit at home when we can just go buy a place in Colorado and, live closer to the things we like, camping and, just skiing and whatnot. So, yeah, now we're here and we're, no looking back.
Nice. Well, so you mentioned the Bay, and I was doing a little digging, and your parents were a big influence in sort of your comics early on.
Yeah.
And I just was like, how cool was that to have two parents that were like, I'm going to bring you comics, like not just mom, but like dad too, bringing you comics. What was that like growing up in that environment?
Well, I mean, growing up, like we lived in San Leandro, so that was like right outside of Berkeley, like 20 minutes away. And Berkeley was like the bastion for all comics, indie comics especially. But like I picked up a ton of old Marvel and DC books back in the day. And it was part of the culture. And so my mom would drive me around on the weekends for that stuff, and also Japanese robots, which really plays into the Jenny Zero series that we do at Dark Horse. But my dad got shipped out to New York for his job. He worked for Pacific Bell, and they needed him there for a year. So he left, and he would call every night, and that was fine and dandy. But like he would come home once a month with a big fat stack of comic books because he knew that I loved him, and then we would just read them together and share that kind of father-son time with me, either curled up on his lap or me in his lap, and, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, many things we do not see eye to eye on. But the one thing that we did agree on was that comics were awesome. And then that really got the bug in me to do it. I went to art school, did that whole thing. Art school isn't always for everybody. And I don't know if it is necessary. I'm not the best student. I don't think I ever was a great student. And a lot of people go to art school, they just kind of wind up there because they're like, oh, it's a great hobby I want to get into, or, I've got rich parents and whatnot. My parents weren't like terribly rich. And for the money that we spent on me going to art school and then eventually dropping out of art school, they could have just made me a doctor. Probably I'd be making a ton more money. I don't know. I would be, covered in blood, most likely somewhere, but I cannot stand the sight of blood. So yeah, that was not going to work out for me. But
yeah. We all have hopes and dreams that maybe weren't realized, that were maybe parent inspired, right? I was going to be a lawyer. That was my big hope and dream, and go to Berkeley. And we, I could have been an engineer. Like I'm great at math, but I think that, and science, but that suits me on the business side of comics, which a lot of people don't really think about. They're like, the work starts after the book is done, and so people are always like, how do you get so many books done? I'm like, because I know that the finish line isn't the book. The finish line is getting that book into stores and making sure that, I get to touch base with, fans about those books, because there's nothing like art art gets reflected back at you. And if it doesn't, it's not art, in my opinion, Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you went to art school. You're more known now for maybe being a writer, but you've also produced comics. So which of those three would you say is more maybe like rewarding?
Well, I'll say writing, and you know what? This is the weirdest one. That's a great question, and this is the weirdest answer. I also just like, when I started doing indie books, I lettered comics on my own, because I was like, at first, like I did by hand. My penmanship is pretty great, but then with the advent of computers, I mean, it was something I still did out of necessity. It was like the last step in making comics, but also the point where I was like, do I really want to spend money? I've already spent money like paying artists and colorists, and I'm a lot of times I don't take money up front. A lot of times I'm just any advance we get, I give to the artists, because they're the ones putting in hours and hours and hours of work. But for me, comics don't become comics until they're lettered. To me, if they're just pretty pictures or they're just pretty words. So when I get to letter my own books and then read through them, I'm like, we just made a comic book. And so to me, the most satisfying thing is lettering, which is, I hate to say that. It's so strange.
That, though. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea. I love comics just because I can get an idea out of my head, and within a week or two, I could have a script. But again, that script could take a year to get drawn, right? Or depending on who your artists are, or even if you have artists at the time, right? Sometimes I have to go on a recruitment drive and figure out who the heck's going to work with me. But the lettering part of it is always consistently me. So I get the last final say. And it's kind of nice because I get to take my scripts and edit them on the fly. Like if my words don't match the pictures, I get to edit myself. And, at that point the art's done, and we've gone through different, stages of development on that. So I've already agreed that the art is perfect. So I have to then go and take my script and try to match that perfection, that I get from those artists. So, yeah.
You're like, ooh, that didn't work. We're just going to cross that.
Well, and, sometimes panels will drop off. I'm like, oh, I didn't notice that, Magenta King over at Dark Horse combined those two panels. And now I've got these words that I've got to kind of like Tetris spin into place to make it work on the page. So there's a lot of like problem solving. I don't think letterers get enough credit, because and there's one letterer out there listening to this right now that's like, hell yeah, this guy gets
Let's
it.
Go.
But like, like they're the ones that have to, in certain points, be the editor, where they have to make sure that what they're transposing on the page is actually accurate. And I've heard horror stories about well-known writers that misspell everything. And so you're almost the last line of defense in indie comics. Hopefully, if you're not in indie comics, you have like editors that are double checking, triple checking everything. Right. Like the people at Dark Horse are excellent. I'm like, man, things that my co-writer and I, Brockton, miss, it's just embarrassing sometimes, but yeah, letterers solve a lot of problems, because if the lettering is wrong, it looks terrible. If the lettering is right, no one notices. And that's kind of a punch in the dick, you know what I mean? Like, that's like a really hard just truth for a lot of people, It's that unsung hero in comics is the letterer, I mean, recently, not recently, in the last 20 years, colorists have been getting their day finally, but I don't think letterers really have yet. So
we gotta bump up the letterers.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because so as an artist, you've worked with quite a lot of artists, really cool artists. You mentioned Magenta King and Santi Goulian, as an artist yourself, is it hard for you to sometimes maybe say stuff or not say stuff because that world so well?
No. I mean, luckily, and I think that, I guess here's the thing, maybe when I first started and I didn't have enough money to pay artists and no one knew who I was. And that's not to say that anyone knows who I am now, but it was one of those things where you enter a relationship without that level of trust. But I feel like, you mentioned Santi, we've worked on a couple of projects together, and he gets it. He gets me, he gets my scripts, and my scripts, the way I write, because I started out as an artist, they're extremely visual and they're extremely loose when they need to be and very specific when they need to be, right? So if I have something specific in mind and they don't love it, or they change it, well, not that they don't love it, maybe they don't even understand it. Maybe it gets lost in translation or something. I'll go back and say, hey, I think that you need to flip that because this works better to flow into that, and yada, yada. Or I was thinking that when I meant mid-shot, I didn't mean that mid-shot. I think that you need to push the foreground and background a little bit, that kind of stuff. And they get it, right? But and they're seasoned artists too, right? So it's this isn't their first rodeo either. But I think that because I came from the art world, it's a little bit easier to communicate and get what I'm trying to get across in the script out to the artists and into their brains. So not too bad.
Well, and it's like you said, it's about trust, right? And it's trusting all those people that are working on it, your editors, your letterers, your colorists, your artists, to produce that vision, I guess.
Right.
So
right.
You've mentioned Dark Horse a couple times, and I want to get into Jenny Zero because I loved it. I thought it was great.
Right.
It's, Dark Horse is still indie, but a bigger, publishing company. How was it sort of working with them and having this, bigger production, as it were?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is revealing too much. So with Dark Horse, it was one of those things where I'm really good friends. In fact, one of my best friends in comics is Justin Greenwood, who is one of the artists from Stumptown. It was an ABC show that came out during COVID, and then it got renewed and then canceled because of COVID. But he and I always tend to get tables next to each other just because there's nothing better than hanging out with your friends and laughing during an entire convention. And he was working on a book called Crone at Dark Horse. And this is right place, right time. But I was just showing anyone that could take a little bit of time out of their schedule of the book, but I was just literally just on my phone, hey, take a look at this. And then I would just hand my phone to editors and they'd scroll through, rather than no one at conventions loves when people drop off packets, because those packets just wind up in a box and then you never see it again. So I don't like that. I like to make the connection, take the card home, and then I'll email them. It's like dating, right? You don't want to email them too fast, but I was like, I'll hit him up. So, but he left looking at my phone saying, yeah, please definitely send it to me. And it was my editor, Brett. And when he got the book, we had already done 4 issues. We were done. It was ready to go. But that was a lot by design. We knew that Magenta King at the time wasn't the fastest artist. He needed to get up to speed. I don't know if it was his first big project. And at the time, you don't even know how big the project's going to be, because we weren't at Dark Horse. We were just making this independent book. But when Dark Horse got it, I don't know if they necessarily knew what they had. And I don't think they necessarily knew it was going to be successful. So they let the first issue go out basically with no edits. They were like, this is great, go, fine. And then it was a hit. And then they were like, oh, wait a second, we really need to look at everything that these guys are doing, because, it wasn't necessarily that Brett wasn't looking at it from an editor's standpoint. It was just, there was at that point potentially a room for a sequel, right? So you've got to make sure that everyone is on the same page as far as where the story is headed. Because you've read it, we leave it on a huge cliffhanger. That cliffhanger was built into it when we were hell or high water, we're going to continue the series. And then we got Dark Horse. And then it was like, well, is Dark Horse going to give us a sequel? We have no idea. I don't know when this is going to come out. I'm going to announce it, though. I'm going to announce it. So we did get a sequel. So the sequel is, So it's coming, like the trade. I'm hoping that through the magic of the internet that this comes out after 2/9, because that's when the trade's coming out. And that is where we show people on the last page that, well, maybe it's not the last page, but it's close to the last page, that we're coming back.
Oh, nice.
For a second one. So they want to keep it a secret until the book's released, but then after that it's full court press. But yeah, we're into the second issue. The first issue is going to be in previews February, March. So we don't really have a lot of time. So hopefully we can keep up the schedule we're on and just crush it. But but I write it with Brockton McKinney, and he's like one of my BFFs, not just in comics, but just in life. My wife is completely amused every time we talk because we end the conversation with "I love you" every time.
The true bromance.
It really, well, this is a good little sidebar story. That I met him because I had published one of his books at Action Lab when I was the creative director there, and I love this book. It was called M Theory, and it's just fucking fantastic, just good book. And then I got to talking with him, and then he came to a convention and just thanked me for publishing his book. First time I met him, and we hung out. I was like, man, I've never met a nicer guy. He's like a real cutie. And like, I went home and I was like, baby, I think I got a crush on this guy. I don't know. Like, he's just so cool. And then she's like, well, who are you talking about? So I, again, went to my phone and showed her a picture of Brockton. And she's like, I don't see it, Dave, blah, blah, blah. And then we wound up hanging out in North Carolina where they live. And she was like, oh, I definitely get it now. And I was like, see, I told you, now we both have crushes on this guy. But then, as we did a couples vacation where we went to Puerto Rico Comic Con, and Brock and I worked that while the ladies enjoyed Puerto Rico, the beaches and all that good stuff. So we were just like, let's just try and make this a paid vacation. Yeah. And, we got locked out of our Airbnb, and in Puerto Rico, they have these huge security walls. And so like we left our keys and our phones in the apartment. And we went on a beer run with just our wallets and came back, and we were like, we got nothing to do but sit here and drink these on the side of the street. And that's where we came up with Jenny Zero. We were just trashed. It was like we really set the tone for this book about a crazy drunk junkie. We were just drunk and rowdy on the streets while we were like writing it. We woke up in the morning and just started typing, and we were literally over each other's shoulder typing this thing. So yeah, well, it's crazy. And
I'm kind of curious about that because, I really love the character of Aiko Sato.
Yeah.
The like old
drunken master,
like mysterious wise, right? It's Yoda. It's not, they can always kick your ass, right? Like, but they don't seem like it. And then, just always wisecracking. And sure. I'm curious, like when you're writing for these characters, right? Jenny's obviously a super, sarcastic, loud, drunk, right? And you have a sort of other sarcastic character. How much of that, while you were drunk writing this story initially, was that you and Brock, right?
Oh, it's all me and Brock. But like the thing is like Jenny and Dana, her best friend, that is at certain times of the year or day or hour. I'm Dana and he's Jenny, and then it flips. We both drink a little too hard. I'm not gonna lie. And I'll show you these because these are like, my office is crazy, but I did want to show you, like I had this other friend of mine. This is how much we love each other. So there's a joke where we call people mayonnaise boys in it. And that's a Brock thing. Like, I don't know what comes up with catchphrases all the time. And I'm like, just go, whatever a mayonnaise boy we're going to do. Yeah. And I had him do these mayonnaise boy. These are like these Garbage Pail Kid drawings. I had my friend paint them. And I did one for me, and it was Drunk Dial Dave. And then I did Scotch on the Brocks. And
nice.
He's just drowning in scotch. And so like we just have this odd party relationship. And, I think the hardest thing about being that party person is people know you're that party person, especially in the small circles that we all roll in with comic books. Yeah. And so we could both be like, yeah, we're going to take the night off from drinking, but the fans and the peers that we have will never let us at these conventions. So we're constantly trashed all the time. It's ridiculous. We're just probably the most ridiculous people you've ever met, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I feel like Jenny's Zero is a ridiculous comic to a certain extent. So
yes,
that translate, like hearing more about you and his relationship, I'm like, oh yeah, that definitely comes through on the page. Like Alpha Major was just hilarious. I was I was dying. I was like, I know that guy. I've had to have that conversation with that guy, right? Like it was just too perfect.
Yeah, he is not done. He's going to be in the sequel for sure. It's tough because we have plans for all these characters. Our whole thing about the Action Science Police was, Aiko was part of the original version of that, as was, without spoiling too much, Jenny's mom. So we're going to get into, we peppered this first volume with a lot of flashbacks to Jenny. And then in the next one, we got the luxury of going and doing stuff. Like when we pitched this, we initially pitched it as a 5-issue miniseries, and Dark Horse said, no, make it 4. So we had to then go and cut back and re-edit dialogue to make sure that we saved stuff for the second volume. If there was ever going to be a second volume, we had no idea. So there were, a few things that we had to make exceptions for, but in the long run, because of the sequel, it made everything much, much better. And we're having so much fun, and Magenta is still on board as the artist, and he's upped his game. And we got a new colorist named Arnaldo Robles, who I met in Puerto Rico at the Puerto Rico Comic-Con. So we're actually now we're like home team Puerto Rico is basically what it is. The three of us were at that show when we created it. So
nice.
It was great to bring him on board too. And he's just knocking it out of the park.
Yeah. Well, so, I feel like this story, right, brings this idea of, monsters and has a sort of, kick-ass vibe, right? And it, just sort of reminded me of how Cobra Kai is back. Anime's back. I mean, I don't think anime ever left, but it really feels like maybe all the things of our youth are now cool or retro cool.
Oh, yeah.
And, how does that feel for you, right? Because maybe the things that actually weren't even cool back then are now considered cool.
Well, we talked about that. But I used to manage a comic shop, and we used to talk about this thing just kind of flippantly, but it's the 20-year cycle. And it may actually be longer now. It might be 20 to 30 years because entertainment is just much more readily available and prevalent, so that you can actually jump into something that you remember. Like you get that 20-year cycle because parents that were young at one point want their kids to get into the things that they were into when they were young. So, before Star Wars became Star Wars again, there was a 20-year cycle on Star Wars. It would come back. Star Trek, same thing. If you look at the way those shows were staggered throughout history, if you look at it, it's like every 20 years, you're like, there's a new Star Trek. So for us, it was just sort of fortuitous that we came up with Jenny, who is a kind of like an Ultraman, the daughter of Ultraman. And we got to pepper in a lot of the things that we grew up with as kids, like Shogun Warriors and, Godzilla. And I mean, you can look around my office and there's Godzillas and giant robots. And then up there, I've got Shogun Warriors. And back there, I've got a Beastie Boys poster with Optimus Prime on it. But for me, one of the tried and true tropes about mainstream comics and superhero comics in particular is that idea of legacy and responsibility. And I think that that's for me where Jenny started. For Brockton, it was a completely different thing. Brockton, we were acting things out. He's drunk. He's throwing beer cans at me. And he's like, Dave, he's from North Carolina, so I'm gonna butcher his accent. But he's like, Dave, what do you think? I've always wanted to make a girl, a great girl character. She's like a monster. She's got these just claws, just giant claws. And I was like, and I was like, that sounds like Dark Child to me, and I don't like it. And I was like, here's an untapped market for you. I just took the word giant, and I was like, what about gigantism? I was like, dudes, I know dudes that love giant women for some reason. It sticks. And I was like, and I made a joke, and he was like, I like it. And I was like, okay, well then what does that really mean? And then we were like, what if you had Paris Hilton as the daughter of a superhero is basically what it was. She's just famous for being famous. She's living off of the name. Rather than make her a hotel heiress, we made her publicist a hotel heiress.
Right.
We just did a lot of things that we like in that first conversation that we were like, we can do this, we can't do that. We have to and then for me, it was legacy and responsibility. It was like, look, and we got a lot of flack for this, but we really presented, especially in that first issue, a really flawed, kind of broken human character, and
which is what I liked about it. Honestly, I liked how bad, how unapologetically awful she was. That was part of the charm for me.
Yeah, and for us too. But we know that you can't go through 12 steps and let people in on 11 and 12. We got to go all the way down and strip it down to the most emotionally resonant part of Jenny. And to me, that's this broken nerve in her mind. You know what I mean? She's just, no matter what she does, she feels like she can't succeed. She's always in her father's shadow. She's always trying to look for distractions to take her away from all of the pain of knowing that she's a failure, right? And this, it's all stuff that we've gone through, I mean, Brock and I we talk about it all the time. We're like, hey, remember when we were homeless? And we're like, yeah, totally. I wasn't homeless for that long, but it's a real thing. And substance abuse on both sides of it with me and Brock. And we just know that we've lived harder lives than most people. And we kind of wanted to put that raw nerve out there a little bit, and I don't know if we get many female characters like Jenny. I don't know. I mean, you might get a Wolverine back in the 80s that was busted and messed up, but he had a healing factor. That's kind of unrealistic. You know what I mean? You put him through the meat grinder, it doesn't really matter. But for something like Jenny to be out there in the world for us, and then for us to be able to just kind of, like I said, give it everything that we possibly could and put it in everything that we love about pop culture into it. Oh yeah, we're in. You know?
Yeah. She has it reminds me of BoJack Horseman a little bit.
Yep.
That character of almost irredeemable because they're so broken, but then you find these moments of humanity that sort of endear you to that character, which I think is great. So
yeah, we just went back and forth. We were doing the final edit on the new issue, the first issue, and we were going through, and Brock had just written this really touching scene, and I was like, usually I'm the one that's the grounded, sensitive one, and then usually he's the one that's got all the dick jokes, and there's tons of that stuff in Jenny too. But I always think that I'd write Back to the Future, and Brockton would write Rick and Morty. That's the kind of, same thing, but, he's just really funny. And not to say I'm not, but I'm always trying to come at it from when am I going to make someone cry? And then I read that scene that Brockton wrote, and I was like, man, I almost dropped a tear, you son of a bitch. You got me. And he, just because he is funny and off the cuff doesn't mean that he is not one of the best dramatic writers I know too, and he's done a lot of films, so he thinks really cinematically too. So yeah, we have a really good time just writing. And the way we write's very, very strange. We have a Google Doc, and I'll write 5 pages, and then I'll be like, go ahead, one up me. And then he'll go and write 5 pages, and then he'll send it back. And then he's like, I got here, go ahead. And then we go and we amp it up, and it keeps ramping up into insanity. And then we have to wake up from this, I don't know, opium haze of creativity and figure out what gets to stay in the book,
I feel like that's a really good way of describing creativity.
Yeah.
An opium haze sometimes, for sure.
I mean, there's nothing like having a good tall glass of wine and just writing a script and focusing on it. There's nothing like it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so, Jenny feels personal, but I think there's a comic that is a little more even personal, which is Cyrus Perkins. I want to hit on it just a little bit because it's inspired by your own true story, right? And,
yeah.
And
what a nightmare. I mean,
that just it. How did you get from point A to point B, and how much of Cyrus is you? I guess.
Oh, that's a weird. Well, geez, is Cyrus me? All right, so I guess I have to preface it by explaining what Cyrus Perkins is to people that don't know. It's about a little boy that dies in the back of a taxi cab, and then his spirit winds up stuck in the taxi, and then he haunts the cabbie into solving his murder so he can go to heaven. So it's like a buddy coming of age, post-mortem coming of age story in the back of a taxi cab. I don't know. It's cool. But when I turned 40, like all my warranties failed. Like 40 was not a good year. We were talking about how 2022 is kind of starting out to be a crap sandwich. But when I turned 40 8 years ago, that was the year, the hardest year I've ever had. I had heart surgery. They put 3 stents in because I had like a blockage that was I had 3 blockages, but one was 98%. And if I had let it go, I would have had a stroke or worse. So a month before this happened, I had the stents put in and I was on blood thinners. And then I went home from my day job thinking I had food poisoning. It turned out that it was, 5 days later, it was not food poisoning. 6 days later, well, on the 6th day, I should say, I called out of the blue, I think my ex-wife called and it was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, she's like, I haven't heard from you. And I'm like, well, going through some stuff. I think it's food poisoning. She's like, you're a dummy. That's not food poisoning. There's no way that's food poisoning. And I was like, okay, fine. I'll call a doctor. Call the doctor. And they were like, no way, dummy. That's not food poisoning. We'll get you an ambulance. And the symptoms were crazy. It was just like, I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't hold down water. I was severely dehydrated to the point where I have atrophy, just screaming. Like I'd fall out of bed and not be able to get up. And I didn't know what the heck was going on. And felt good for like one day, drove myself to Safeway, ate a chocolate cake in the parking lot, got home and then just like vomited rainbows for like a day. It was just, it's too much information. I get it. But like,
no, not too much information. I mean, it just sounds painful.
Really. It was awful. It was, and I had no idea. So I finally called the doctor and they were like, we'll call you an ambulance. And I'm like, I know your game. You're going to try and stick me with like a $5,000, bill. I'm not going to fall for it, suckers. I'll drive myself. And they were like, no, you won't. Call a cab. So I called a cab and then, I sat on the porch waiting for like 15 minutes. And then when he showed up, I crawled out to the curb, got in and just said hospital and passed out and woke up to him screaming like, which hospital are we going to? I don't know where we are, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, Kaiser, that way, go. Yeah. And then I passed out again. They got me out of the car. I gave him a credit card. He ran it. And then I didn't see him again. Right. And then but on the way, I came to as he was screaming at me and I was like, dude, if I die in this cab, I'm going to haunt it. And then I was like, I went, and then after we got to the hospital, they realized it was my gallbladder and they couldn't take it out because of the heart surgery. I was on blood thinners, so they couldn't operate on me. So they like literally stuck a tube into my side and just let it be there for a month while I was getting off of blood thinners. And they wouldn't let me, they were like, don't fly, don't drink, get a lot of sleep, blah, 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 blah. And then that book Vamblets that I did for Scholastic was coming out and it was going to debut at San Diego Comic-Con that month. And I was like, well, I'm going to that. There's no way I'm not going to that. Yeah. So I would sit there and I would sign books and then just be like, oh yeah, and pass out. And I would be sweating. It was, and I have like a really good con work ethic. And I'm usually standing and I'm talking to people. It's just the way you do. I don't like, that's the reason I don't draw at conventions because you're always looking down and you're never making eye contact. You don't make friends that way. And so I would pass out. I'd wake up. I finally was like, I got to go back to the hotel room and sleep. They let me go. And it was the first San Diego Comic-Con where I didn't spend every hour on that floor standing. And, when I got home, I called my friend Anna Lencioni, who is a wonderful, wonderful storyboard artist out in Hollywood. She and I had worked on some books previously. And I explained the story as I did to you. And she was like, it's so weird that you called me right now. I just got out of a coma. And I'm like, wait, what happened to you? And she was like, oh, I had a blood clot that traveled up into my brain and shut my brain off for a month and a half, and they had to cut it out. I was like, are you kidding me? So she was gone for a month and a half in a coma. When she got back, I'm like, I couldn't think of two better broken people to work on this book. Like we both need something cathartic in our lives right now. So we came up with Cyrus, and she crushed it. She's amazing. And now she's working. She was at DreamWorks. She was at Sony. I don't know where she's at right now, but she's just amazing, and she did How to Train Your Dragon cartoon on Netflix. She's just done a ton of amazing stuff since. And the rights for that book were hung up at Action Lab until just very, very recently. And I got them back, and now I'm working on the sequel. So
Yay.
I'm very excited. Very excited.
Yeah. I think part of the reason maybe I thought there was a lot of you in there, and I'll just, is sort of, I feel like there's a lot of comments that were like, oh, you youngsters. Right? And I was a little offended because Cyrus is 31. And I was like, he is too young to be saying that.
I don't know if that's true. What was the last time you had a 31-year-old and a 15-year-old in a closed quarters together for a long time?
I know. Maybe being on the other side of 31, I'm like, 31 is so young, right? But I think too, because it gave me such a Dead Like Me, pushing daisies kind of vibe, but in a taxi, right? Yeah. It was and thinking about Mind Palace, right? It just feels like you really vibe with that.
Yeah.
That world and that sort of storytelling. And so that's why I think I was just kind of feeling like it was just a really personal book for you.
Well, it is. And like I tell everyone, it's like when you get lemons, you make lemonade, or you just wince at the sourness of them, right? So I would much rather try to turn something terrible into something good. And, the same thing with Mind Palace. It was it was a running joke in my mind that Bryan Fuller, who is a frigging genius in my mind, could have so many awesome ideas and so many quality shows that get canceled well before they should. They become cult classics and everyone loves them. But the joke is he never gets to finish a story. And coming from indie comics, where I had a company that I founded holding something hostage from me in Action Lab, like I said, we parted because I just couldn't deal with their contracts anymore. But they had it for so long that I was feeling like I got canceled, in a Bryan Fuller kind of way, where I had a huge runway and I had this plane that was ready to take off, and it was really, the fans had gassed it up and we were ready to go. And then they were like, no, we don't want it anymore. And I'm like, well, can I have it back? They're like, no. Well, then you're killing my project, So when I was at my lowest, that idea of Bryan Fuller stuff popped in my head again. And then I was like, well, his ideas are still alive somewhere in his brain. And I'm like, what if they're just driving him crazy? What if all of those unfinished projects are just eating away at his subconscious? And I'm like, yeah. And so then I was in a lark. I was like, I'm just going to do this book. And Santi and I had already worked on the Prom of the Dead book. And we knew we were going to do the sequel to that, but I knew that I was still a year or two away from just wanting to do that. Yeah. So I'm like, in the meantime, why don't we just do this webcomic for fun? I'll pay you your wages or whatever, but we'll just do it for fun. And the Fanable. So it involves all of Bryan's canceled shows and their characters in his head. So you get to see Hannibal playing with Ned from Pushing Daisies. You get to see everyone from Dead Like Me. It was the first time I had written someone else's characters. And I've been such a huge fan that I felt like I channeled them well enough, and then I put it out there in the world, and Bryan found it, and Bryan became my number one fan, and when I was talking about it earlier, how art gets reflected back at you. When the creator of the art reflects your art back to you, that is the most, for me so far, profound thing that's ever happened to me. And along the path, Bryan and I wouldn't say we become friends, but we talk, and
validation, right?
And he's a great dude, and he's very supportive of his fans. That's the thing. I wanted to do a book that felt like a Vertigo book, but also paid homage to one of my favorite creators, and I'm shocked that Bryan hasn't done more comics because he's a huge comic fan too,
Yeah. What is it about Bryan's work that you love so much?
Well, first of all, his cinematography is insane. His shows are just friggin' beautiful to look at. I like that he has built a slight universe. They all sort of tie together. In my books, like Double Jumpers and Cyrus Perkins, trying to think of the other. I mean, I've done so many books, but there is always something in all of the books that ties them together. And so if you read all of my books, you'll be able to see that. And that's always fun. And I was able to call that out with his Muffin Buffalo thing that was in Pushing Daisies and also Wonder Falls. And I'm like, you know, he got it. And then I actually got to go meta and pull Bryan out of the story and focus just on Bryan for a chapter, which I did a little sleuthing myself to figure out who his agents were and, like what their backgrounds were and what happened with the Vampire Chronicles. He was going to do the Anne Rice Vampire Lestat stuff.
Been amazing. And I'm so glad that didn't happen.
It would have been like the sexiest thing you'd ever seen in your life. God. It would have been crazy. It would have
been so good.
I like that a lot of Bryan's characters are unrequited. That's probably, they're broken too. And I think I like that. And I think that for me, I think that we've all been there, and I'm sure Bryan has been there. And I think that's what I love about his characters. They're tragic, but so beautiful at the same time. Like you look at Will Graham and you're like, what a nightmare. And no one's done Will Graham like he's done Will Graham. They tried with Ed Norton and I'm like, fail. That is nowhere near the Fuller Hannibal. But I can't wait to see what he does with Christine too. And he was telling me that he was working on a documentary, and I'm like, what is that? And he wouldn't tell me, but I was like, what is that? I got to know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm friends with people that in Hollywood, and one of the vice presidents over at Legendary, like I keep telling him, hey man, I got this giant monster book called Jenny Zero. You guys just make it into a movie. You're already doing all that crap. Let's do it. So I sat in a meeting with them. Was it the year before last? And they were like, we had a meeting with Bryan Fuller. We brought you up. I was like, why would you bring me up in your meeting with Bryan Fuller? They're like, we just wanted to see if you knew what you do. And he was like, yeah, Bryan had nothing but good things to say about you. And I was like, never mention me again. Stop that. That's weird. But yeah, he's just a really, really supportive dude, Yeah. I probably would have dialed back on comic books because at the time that I started doing Mind Palace, I was pretty much at a low. It was nothing's working out. Everything's getting canceled. Because
it was COVID, right?
Well, it was before COVID. It was at San Diego Con the year before COVID. So the July before COVID that we debuted it. Honestly, COVID's weird. COVID sort of helped my career a little bit because all these editors are sitting at home. So what are they going to do but answer my emails? You know what I mean? I couldn't get a response for months from these editors before COVID, and now I'm like I can get a response within like an hour or two. That's we're all just sitting around looking for connection at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting you say that because I feel like there's all this talk about how publishing is going downhill and comic fans are aging out and like comics are dead, right? There's sort of like that rhetoric, but I feel almost like COVID I feel like that's an opposite effect because we're all at home reading, consuming media, and it's such an opportunity for comics, to be in part of that entertainment world and entertainment scape. But I think indie comics are really the way where that's going to happen. And I'm curious, like, not that anyone would ever turn down Marvel or DC. I know that, but like, what are your thoughts on staying more in the indie world versus trying to go more mainstream?
It's a catch-22, really, right? It's like everyone that is a larger, more successful indie creator at one point or another, or still do work for the big two. So like, the perfect scenario for me would be like, oh, I've got a really great Hulk story and I really have a great Hulk story. I would love to do it. If I could convince Marvel to do it, I'd love to drop that because I know it's a hit. I just know it's a hit, right? And I'm like, drop that, get the notoriety, go back to indie comics and do my indie comics. I feel like that's like probably everyone's goal. I mean, my goal was to be in Marvel and DC and to write for them monthly. But looking at that grind, I'm like, first of all, I can probably do a monthly book. Yeah, sure. I might be able to do 2, but like I would need to do 2 or 3 solid a month to pay the bills.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get double taxed because you're basically a contractor, right? So your taxes are going to be off the charts. And that's why people like to sign exclusives, because once you have an exclusive, then you are an employee of the company. But I couldn't afford to work for Marvel or DC, and I can't. I mean, I can afford to continue to make my own books, but at least at the end of the day, even if I make no money on my books, they're mine. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I would love to do some stuff. I mean, like I've been talking to Justin about what we would do. And so we've come up with a few street level pitches. We're just like, but we're quietly, secretly working on a creator project. So like, when are we going to have the time to get to pitch a Moon Knight or whatever, you know?
Well, and I think it goes back to the thing we were talking about of the minute you anticipate something like that, it's not going to happen, but then something else will come your way that if it was unexpected, like, then this got picked up and I didn't think that, and now I don't have time for this other thing,
right?
Even if I wanted to, because now this awesome project has fallen into my lap, right?
Right. And and there are a few like benefactors in my career that people that like for one reason or another just liked my work and wanted me to work on some other stuff. So I've gotten some cool video game work and some like adjacent to comic work. For some reason I got like known to be the sports comic book writer, which I thought was weird. Like I worked with the NBA, I worked with the NFL, I've worked with the UFC. No, I have not worked with the PGA. But I've like for some reason, like whenever someone's like, "Hey, yeah, we need to write this comic," like I turned down a Kobe Bryant comic book to work with Kobe Bryant back in the day because I was like, that guy seems real shady. And then like when he died, everyone's like, he's a saint, and I'm like, was he a saint? I don't really know. But at the time, I was like, I think I'll work with the UFC instead of Kobe. And now, like. Maybe I would have liked to work with Kobe just to have the experience because I hear he's kind of a weirdo, but with like really crazy, like Grant Morrison style ideas, like he's just a nut. So that might have been fun, but I don't know. I worked with the NBA before and not really loved it, And I think the Kobe thing was like, oh, it'll be out in China only, and I was like, I don't know,
random.
What am I going to do with that? I don't know. Yeah,
but it's funny how we get these things and then it perpetuates other, it's sort of like, oh yeah, that's the sports guy, right? Or that's this guy or that, and then all more things come because of that.
Well, yeah. And like, I have friends that like are the darkest SOBs on the planet. And like, when they're like, oh, we have an all ages project. Yeah. I mean, some people, like if people read Jenny, they're not going to think about me for that. But if you read Vamplets or Cyrus Perkins, you might, right? Yeah. So like, that's the thing where like, if a door shuts, another door opens, right? Yeah. So
if you could be known for something besides maybe being the sports guy,
oh God,
what would you want to be known for?
Best letterer? No, let's see. I don't know, man. Oh, geez. How about someone that like is prolific because they believe in their work? Like. There are so many people in the industry waiting for for a publisher to say, yes, let's go. Whereas I'm like full steam ahead. Life is going to find a way. I'm going to get this book published somewhere. Yeah. And like, it's not necessarily a work ethic. It's just a belief in the project. It's commitment to the project. I think that, I have a notebook full of ideas and I'm like, always asking my wife, which one do you think I should do? Because I can't do all of them all at once. Yeah. And so like there are projects that are on deck that are being put on hold because I finally got Cyrus Perkins back and I'm like, well, it's about time. It's time for me to get back to that book. Yeah. So there are 2 projects that I put on hold just for that. Right. But yeah, I think I would much rather be known as a prolific creator that doesn't stick to one genre. Because if you look at all of my stuff, I intentionally don't. And maybe to my own detriment, if I'm known in a small space for being the Hannibal guy, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate into someone thinking, oh, I got to go buy Jenny Zero or vice versa. Right. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, but if you're like a guy or a creator that just does one thing, at least you don't have to hard sell them on 5 different things. You can just be like, yeah, I'm the horror guy,
Yeah. So, I'm the guy for that. That's what you want. Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's important, regardless of what you're known for, to believe in your work. So if that's what it is, then I think that's great. Yeah. Speaking of which,
go ahead.
We can't touch on everything you've done, but is there any other projects that you really believe in right now that you want to share with our audience?
Oh, that I'm working on?
Or that you've already finished that might be coming out, or another project that we just didn't mention?
Oh man. I mean, you nailed my 3. It's like Mind Palace. To me was such a odd achievement that that is front of mind for me. I'm Jenny coming out and getting a sequel validated us in a big way. Like, you know, like a Bryan Fuller, like my old projects, like a lot of times you don't get a sequel. A lot of times you don't get that next season. So to know that Dark Horse was behind this project really made me feel like I could go anywhere and pitch anything and not feel like I'm just someone off the street.
Yeah.
You know, and I still am someone off the street. Don't get me wrong, people on the street.
We're all someone off the street.
But I feel like it bolstered my belief in myself. Yeah. So those three, I'm trying to think of what else I've done that really, I mean, you know what the craziest thing is? I've done so many books that I'm like, what have I done? You know, I really like Double Jumpers. I think that's like if you were to ask like my friends, they would say that's the closest thing to me, but it is intentionally meant to disrupt and anger people, but it's also really, really funny. So no one got angered by it. Like, I think it was CBR. It was in their top 100 the year it came out, like above Brian Azzarello books. So I'm like, that's no way in hell. That guy's a gangster. I'm not that guy, you know?
Right.
But people really, really responded to that. And it really does speak to the kind of toxic culture in video games, which, you know, then being able to get into a writer's room in a video game studio, it's very, very close to that. But when I was writing Double Jumpers, I had no idea what that was like. I was just faking it. And then when I got there, I was like, wow, I nailed it. I guess it's perfect. That's a great one. Wow. Honestly, like there's another book that I did called Infinite Seven that is so like oddly lowbrow and highbrow at the same time that I don't even want to explain it, but it's just like a balls out action thing that I really, really like that I did get 2 volumes of. I did have a third one that never got produced, which I would love to go back to. But again, it's like when you have a notebook full of ideas, do you go back to the old ones or do you move forward? And for me, it was just move forward a bit, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Well, I look forward to obviously the sequel to Jenny Zero. I'm like, I
want to see if I can. Let me see if I can do this. I'll show you, and for the people that are on the YouTubeables can see some of the stuff that we're working on. You're at first exclusive here. This is like good stuff. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Only on Spoiler Country.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's perfect, right? That's perfect. So let me see if I can do this. Let's see. And yeah, I'll show you some of the colors. Let me see if I can share a screen here and do this.
Yeah, you should be able to.
Okay.
This is so exciting.
Yeah, let's see, share screen. Okay, so for people watching at home, this is the art with the new colors. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
It's
real. Oh, it's so cool.
It's bananas. It's so good. It really does and we're going to get into the origin of her father. We're going to show you, we're going to go into the past. It is just unbelievably great to see that we could come back and get the Runaway to do what we wanted to do, but then also to come back with this level and this kind of refinement in the project. We knew that we had something, but we were constantly trying to figure out what that was. And I think at this point we got it. Like this is this weird obelisk that appears, and I'm just gonna spoil it. No more spoilers.
Yeah, no more spoilers. I'm seeing a lot of Dean Martin, which really makes me happy. For those just listening to this, Dean Martin is the dog in Jenny Zero, and so these images there's a lot of Dean Martin, who was just one of my favorite characters. Reminded me of like Lion Cat, where it's just like it's, you know, the animal becomes another player in the story, and I just love that. So
yeah. And honestly, like, by the way, they don't love it when I share artwork. But I don't care. But yeah, I mean, that dog is actually based on Brockton's dog Beezer. So Brockton doesn't go anywhere without Beezer, and like a lot of times I'll be calling and he'll be like, I'm running with Beezer, what do you need? And I'm just like, just finish your run and then talk to me. But he's so Beezer was the dog. Like, part of what we did with Jenny was like a lot of it was a lot of color design, and I was like, I just want to follow this blue ball of hair bouncing around adventure to adventure. And then Brockton's daughter is slightly based on her, but she's got blue short hair, like super cute. And we're like, oh man, like it really is like we were just inspired by everything and everyone, and especially each other and Magenta. So and then I'll show you the rest of my office for the video if I can. Let me see.
We'll get a sneak peek at your office here.
This is
not a spoiler though. This is just your office.
Yeah. So these are all of my Captain America things because I love Captain America so much, and then all my rare comics are there. And then I have the shelf that I can't show you anything, but I will show you guys my favorite toy up here because oh man, it's too many to choose from. But I have all of my giant Japanese toys up there, and I've got like this Robotech SDF-1. It's ginormous, and this was a series that really it's a thing. So like that's probably my dream. If I could do anything, it wouldn't be work for the big two. It'd be working on a Robotech comic book 100%. Like that's like my favorite thing. Like I've watched.
Well, that's kind of what you're doing, right? I mean, you have Jenny Zero touches on that a little bit. I mean, there's like a lot of Japanese influence, which I love as well. And yeah, I mean, that world is just really vibrant. So
I'm going to show you one last thing. I'm going to show you some covers. Let me see if I can.
Also, is Jenny's last name inspired by anyone?
Well, so Tetsuo is a character from Akira, and we just really wanted to throw it out there.
Is that the Akira reference that I'm hoping for?
It was. Nice. So so definitely that, and then I mean, Shogun Warriors is in there. A little bit of Transformers, a little bit of. Let me show you these. These are the coolest.
I think that's what I like about Jenny Zero is there's these pop culture references that are things I'm into, right? So you can just like get those and just be like, oh yeah, I see that. And I see that. And I see that, they're just little Easter eggs all over there.
Oh yeah. There's so many. It's so funny. We just wrote a scene and I was like, I wrote it and I intentionally wrote it kind of like in a Temple of Doom kind of vibe. And then I wrote a bit of dialogue and Brockton was like, it's a little too on the nose. And then he stole my line and put in the issue before with no reference at all. And I was like, oh my God, you just threw an Easter egg before the Easter egg dropped in the issue before. I was like, you genius. He's a nut. So this is the cover to the new volume. So this is the first cover. And then look at this one. We also like Bob's Big Boys, so we did this thing. So that's the cover to the issue.
I love it. It also kind of has that like Garbage Pail Kids look, like like a little bit of that vibe of just baby face, but yeah.
And then here's your favorite guy.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, this next volume, like I said, it's just going to be so much more than the first one, and we were very, very pleased and proud of the first one. But like at the end of the day, we knew that the story had to move forward and it's going to be really fun, really funny, really heartbreaking. I think it's just going to stick the landing. And we're really we're already third issues written. We're into the fourth and the fourth one's got so much in it that we're going to go extra sized with it, I think.
Nice.
And so it's cool.
Where can people find you? Where's the best place to find you on the internet?
FBI watch list. I would say just at Dave Dwonch everywhere. Like if you want to find me on Twitter, Instagram, it's just my name, DAVEDWONCH. And Facebook, same thing, but with the space and not the @ Sounds pretty easy.
Yeah, pretty easy.
Yeah.
Great.
So, well, thanks for having me. I mean, this has been awesome. I love it.
Thanks so much for being here. I love, just hearing all about what you've done and where you've been and where you're going, because it's really exciting. Well, for everyone listening, Dave is an indie comic, I want to say like connoisseur, because you've done everything, letters, as we talked about, art, writing, producing, but as the writer of Jenny Zero, which we just got a lot of great info about.
I know, you got so many spoilers.
I know, it's great.
Create a new country. Jeez.
From Dark Horse, and the trade paperback's coming out soon, right?
Yeah, it's coming out on Feb 9, and then the announcement's going to come after that for the sequel, which we've spoiled, and that'll be in previews in February, March.
Nice. Yeah. Well, you can check Dave out. We'll put all the links to your socials on our show notes, so you can check them out there. And for those of you still listening, I'm Renee, and this is Spoiler Country.